But my grandmother's lawyer said, "Did your brother actually read the entire trust document?" I felt the floor shift under me, not metaphorically. I had to grab the edge of the kitchen counter because my knees genuinely stopped working. That was 3 weeks after the funeral. 3 weeks after my brother had handed me a garbage bag and told me I had until Sunday. I need to back up. My grandmother, my mare, as I always called her, the way she taught me when I was 4 years old and couldn't say it properly, was 78 years old when she died in October. She lived her whole life in the same stone house in Westmount, the one her own parents had built when they came over from Brittany in the 1950s. The house sat on a corner lot with a massive sugar maple out front that turned a color in autumn that I have never seen anywhere else. Not red, not orange. Something that sat exactly between the two, like the tree was making a decision it hadn't finished yet. She raised me in that house. That part is important. My parents split when I was 6. My father moved to Fort McMurray for work and eventually stopped calling. My mother, her daughter, went through a period she and I don't discuss, and somewhere in the middle of it, I landed on my grandmother's doorstep with a backpack and a Ziploc bag of goldfish crackers. I was 8 years old. My grandmother opened the door, looked at the Ziploc bag, looked at me, and said, "You're just in time." I was about to make soup. She never made it a big thing. That was her way. She just made soup. I grew up in that house, did my homework at her kitchen table, learned to make tourtière from scratch every Christmas, took the 24 bus to Concordia every morning for 4 years. When I graduated, she was in the front row in a yellow cardigan, clapping harder than anyone around her. When I got a job at the hospital doing administrative work for the oncology unit, she told everyone she met that her granddaughter worked with cancer doctors and saved lives. I didn't have the heart to correct her. Honestly, after a while, I stopped wanting to. My brother is 11 years older than me. He and I are not close, and I want to be fair when I say that. It's not that he's a bad person in any dramatic sense. He's just someone who optimized his life very early for a specific kind of comfort and never saw much reason to look sideways. He married well, as people used to say. His wife has a particular way of looking at a room and calculating its square footage. They live in a new build in Brossard, 3-car garage. The kids go to a private school. He visited my grandmother on Christmas and her birthday, sometimes Easter, and he always brought a nice bottle of wine from the SAQ and kissed her on both cheeks and called her grandmaman in the accent he'd kept polished, like a piece of silverware he never actually used. She loved him. Of course she did. He was her grandson. But I was the one who drove her to the Lakeshore Medical Clinic every second Tuesday for her arthritis appointments. I was the one who learned which pharmacist at the Jean Coutu she preferred and why. I was the one who stayed over when the ice storm knocked out power for 3 days, and we played Scrabble by candlelight, and she beat me every single time and refused to let me win even once. When she got the diagnosis, pancreatic, stage 3, moving fast, she told me first. We were sitting in her kitchen with tea, and she said it the same way she would have told me it was going to rain. Matter of fact, calm. But she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and held it there a moment longer than usual. The last 8 months were hard, in the way that those months always are. I took family leave from the hospital. I moved back into my old room. My brother came when he could, which was less than he probably thought it was. His wife sent a fruit basket at one point, the kind that comes wrapped in cellophane with a bow, and I put it on the counter and didn't say anything. Mémère died on a Sunday morning in October, just after 7, while the maple out front was doing its thing with the light. I was holding her hand. My brother arrived 2 hours later. His wife came with him. She was wearing a blazer. The funeral was at St. Leon in Westmount. A lot of people came. She had lived a long time and she had been kind to most of them. The reception afterward was at the house, and I made the food the way she would have wanted. The things she would have made herself: meat pies, squares, those little sandwich triangles with the crusts cut off that she served at every gathering since roughly 1987. My brother gave a very polished speech. I cried through most of it. His wife stood next to him with her hands clasped and her expression calibrated to something between grief and patience. That evening, after people had gone, my brother sat me down at the kitchen table. His wife stayed in the doorway. He told me that he'd already been in touch with the notary, that the succession was straightforward, that the estate, the house, the investments, a small amount of savings, would be going to him as the elder grandchild and closest named beneficiary. He said it the way people announce things they've already decided aren't up for discussion. I asked him if I could see the document. He said the notary had explained it and it was all standard. He said I could speak to his lawyer if I had questions. Then he told me that he'd already been looking at options for the house. His wife mentioned something about the market in Westmount. He said he thought it would probably be best if I started making other arrangements by the end of November. November was 5 weeks away. I was 31 years old and I was sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd done my grade 6 science fair project. Being told I had 5 weeks to leave the only home I'd ever really had. I didn't argue. I don't know why exactly. Shock, maybe. Or some residual instinct from being a child who learned very early not to make problems for the adults around her. I nodded. I said okay. I went upstairs to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at the ceiling, which had a water stain in the corner that my grandmother had called the duck for as long as I could remember. There was a crack running from the duck toward the window that had been there since I was a teenager. I talked to the duck for a while. I didn't feel like I had anyone else. I called my best friend. We'd been close since stage up, the kind of friend who picks up on the second ring at 11 at night without complaint. She drove over from Rosemont and sat with me until 1 in the morning. She said things I needed to hear. She also said, very quietly, "Did you see the actual document yourself?" I hadn't. The next morning, I called the notary's office. The woman who answered was polite, but a little formal, the way Quebec legal offices often are. She said she could confirm that I was named in the estate file and that she would be in touch with me directly within the week regarding certain provisions. I didn't know what to do with that. My brother texted me 2 days later asking if I'd started looking at apartments. His wife had apparently sent him some listings from a Facebook group. One was a studio above a restaurant on Wellington. 560 square feet, $1,850 a month. I started packing some things. Quietly. Old books. The photo albums from the shelf in the hallway that had pictures of me as a baby, me at school concerts, me and Mère at Parc La Fontaine one summer. I figured those were mine. I took them. I went to the CLSC to ask about emergency housing resources, just to know where I stood. The woman there was kind. She had a list. I took it home and put it face down on the dresser and couldn't look at it again. The call came on a Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen eating toast when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A man identified himself as the notary handling the succession. He asked if I was available to come in the following day. I said yes. He said, "I want to make sure you understand. There are elements of the mandate that require your direct involvement. There are provisions in the document that were not fully communicated to all parties." I asked what he meant. He said, "Your grandmother was very specific and very thorough." The notary's office was on Sherbrooke, one of those older buildings with the original woodwork still intact and a receptionist behind frosted glass. I'd taken the 24 bus out of habit, the same one I'd taken to university for 4 years, and I sat in the waiting room with my coat on my lap and tried to keep my breathing steady. My brother was already there, his wife was not. He looked slightly less polished than usual, the way people look when they're somewhere they feel confident but haven't fully prepared for. He nodded at me. I nodded back. The notary was a man in his late 60s with reading glasses on a cord around his neck and a way of moving through a room like someone who had spent decades being the calmest person in difficult conversations. He shook both our hands and we sat down across from his desk. He opened the file. He explained the trust document. My grandmother had established it through a notarized will in a separate family trust structured under Quebec civil law. She had done it with this same notary, he said, over several years. She had updated certain provisions as recently as 14 months ago. The primary beneficiary for the estate was listed as my brother, as he had understood. But then the notary picked up a separate document, a trust addendum, he called it, a conditional instruction schedule, and he set it on the desk between us, and he tapped the top corner with one finger. He said, "There is a second tier to this arrangement. I want to make sure both of you understand it, because it changes the structure considerably depending on the conditions at the time of activation." My brother shifted in his chair. The condition my grandmother had written in her own plain language, reviewed and formalized by the notary 14 months ago, was this: if the primary heir failed to honor a set of specific obligations within 90 days of the estate passing, the entirety of the residential property, the Westmount house, along with the designated investment portfolio, would transfer in full to me. The obligations were written out in a numbered list. They were not vague. The first was that any family member who had been residing in the property at the time of death would be granted continued residence for a minimum of 1 year, rent-free, with no pressure to vacate. The second was that a monthly contribution of $400 to a specific charitable foundation, a hospice in NDG that my grandmother had supported for 11 years, would continue uninterrupted from the estate for the first 2 years following her death. The third was that her personal effects, including all photographs, handwritten correspondence, and items of personal significance, would not be disposed of, sold, or removed from the property without my written consent. My brother had, in the space of 10 days, asked me to vacate, had made no contact with the Hospice Foundation, and had already told me his wife was looking at estate sale options for the furniture and contents. The notary looked at my brother over his reading glasses. He said very quietly, "Did you read the full document when I sent it to you in October?" My brother said he had reviewed it with his own lawyer. The notary said the addendum was attached as Schedule C. It was 14 pages. There was a long silence. My brother's jaw moved the way jaws do when someone is deciding between several things they could say and rejecting each one. I sat very still. Outside on Sherbrooke, I could hear a bus going past, probably the 24. I thought, absurdly, about my grandmother sitting in her kitchen making soup, not making it a big thing. The notary turned to me. He said the process for activating the conditional transfer would require documentation, specifically, records confirming the conditions had been breached. He said he had already sent a formal notice to my brother's lawyer the previous week, which was why he had requested this meeting. He said, "Your grandmother anticipated that this situation might arise. She was, as I said, very thorough. I thought about 14 months ago, about the particular afternoon when she had told me she needed to do some paperwork and asked if I could drive her to Sherbrooke and wait. I'd sat in a cafe down the street for 2 hours with a cafe au lait and a crossword. When she came out, she was in a good mood. She wanted to stop at Provigo on the way home. I thought about how she'd said, as we drove back along Sherbrooke, 'You know, your grandfather used to say that a good plan is the kindest thing you can leave behind.' I hadn't known what she meant. I'd assumed she was talking about practical things. End-of-life paperwork, funeral arrangements. I understand now what she meant. My brother called me that night. It was a different conversation than the one at the kitchen table. His voice had the texture of someone who had spent the afternoon being very unhappy. He said he thought there had been a misunderstanding. He said the notary had perhaps not explained the original document clearly. He said he wanted to work something out. I listened. I let him finish. I told him I needed some time to think. What I actually did with that time was call my friend from Rosemont, who was a paralegal, and we went through the addendum together over the phone. It was exactly what the notary had said it was. Clear. Numbered. In my grandmother's plain language underneath the formal text. Because she had insisted, the notary told me later, on an attached plain language summary so that no one could claim they didn't understand. She knew. She had known for 14 months, at minimum, probably longer. She had watched my brother come on Christmas and her birthday with his nice wine and his carefully preserved accent. She had watched his wife stand in doorways. And she had, quietly, without any drama, made a plan. The transfer was finalized in January. The Westmount house is mine. The investment portfolio, which my grandmother, who had lived simply and spent carefully her entire life, had grown to just over $340,000, is mine. The hospice and NDG received their first contribution from me personally in November before the legal process was even complete because I didn't want to wait. My brother and I don't speak much. That is not entirely by my choosing. He withdrew after the transfer was finalized, which I understood, even if it hurt in the complicated way these things hurt, when the person you're grieving is also the person you're in conflict with. His wife sent me a message in February. I read it twice and decided not to respond. The maple up front is bare now, in the way Canadian maples are bare from November through to whenever spring decides to show up. But I can see the structure of it, the branches, the shape, the way the whole thing holds together even without the leaves. My grandmother used to say that's when you could really see a tree, when it had nothing left to hide behind. I still eat at the kitchen table where I did my homework. I still take the 24 bus sometimes, even when I don't have to. I made tortilla at Christmas, alone for the first time, and I got the pastry ratio slightly wrong and it didn't matter at all. The duck on the ceiling is still there. I've decided not to fix it. She didn't leave me a house. She left me the understanding that the people who show up, really show up, not just on the holidays with a nice bottle of wine, are the people worth leaving something behind for. She left me proof that kindness has a memory, even when the person doing the remembering is gone. And she left me, tucked into the back of the plain language summary in Schedule C, in her own handwriting on a yellow sticky note that the notary said had been there since the document was first drafted. Make soup first. Everything else can wait. I have that note on the fridge now, held up with the same maple leaf magnet she bought at the craft fair in Sutton in 2009. I'm not going anywhere. I keep thinking about that yellow sticky note on the fridge. Make soup first. Everything else can wait. It's such a small thing to leave behind. And somehow it's the thing that undoes me the most even now, months after everything was settled and the legal papers were signed and the maple out front survived another Quebec winter. My grandmother didn't raise me by giving speeches. She raised me by showing up, repeatedly, without making it a performance. She made soup. She drove me to appointments I'd forgotten I had. She sat across from me at that kitchen table and let me fail at Scrabble and then beat me anyway because she respected me enough not to pretend otherwise. That consistency, that quiet, unglamorous faithfulness to the people she loved is what I think of when I hear the word integrity. Not the version that announces itself. The version that just keeps showing up, even when no one is watching, even when it's inconvenient, even when the person you're showing up for is a kid with a Ziploc bag of goldfish crackers and nowhere else to go. What my brother missed, and I don't think he ever fully understood this, is that my grandmother was paying attention the whole time. Not in a suspicious way, not keeping score. But she was clear-eyed about the people in her life, and she was smart enough to build that clarity into a legal document 14 months before she died. That's not luck, that's wisdom. The kind that comes from living a long time and watching carefully and being honest with yourself about what you see. Even when it's hard, even when it's your own son. I think about the courage it took to do that quietly, to not say anything, to not warn anyone or make ultimatums, or have a dramatic conversation at the kitchen table. She just made her plan and trusted that the truth would sort itself out eventually. That kind of steadiness, the ability to act on what you know is right and then let it unfold without needing to control the outcome, is something I'm still learning. I'm not sure I'm very good at it yet. What I do know is that I almost didn't fight back at all. I almost just took the garbage bag my brother handed me and found a studio on Wellington and convinced myself it was fine. The only thing that stopped me was a single question from a friend at 1 a.m. Did you see the actual document yourself? I didn't. And that one question changed everything. I think that's worth sitting with, not just read the fine print, though yes, obviously, always read the fine print. But also, when someone you trust tells you that something is decided and there's nothing to be done, ask one more question. Look one more time. The people who count on your silence are counting on you not to. My grandmother left me a house, but what I actually inherited was her way of being in the world. The understanding that showing up is its own kind of argument. That a good plan is the kindest thing you can leave behind, and that the people who are quietly, consistently there are the ones worth building something for. The duck on the ceiling is still there. I'm still not fixing it.